Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Athletic School podcast. Today, we're going to talk about mental toughness because I realized that everybody is chasing mental toughness. Coaches want it, parents want it from their kids. When you freeze up or fold under pressure or fall short, that's the word that gets used against you. And you probably think you either have it or you don't. But here's the thing, psychologists have been trying to actually define the word mental toughness since 2002. Multiple research teams, different definitions, decades of study, but they still don't agree on what it is. So today, I wanted to break it down why the version of mental toughness you have been sold, it's basically a myth. And by the end of this episode, I'm going to tell you about the moment of one of the greatest athletes who ever lived admitted his mental toughness wasn't something he was just born with. He built it on purpose. And what he built it out of might surprise you. Here's what's wild to me. Mental toughness gets treated like it's obvious, like it's just a fact that you can see that guy's tough and that guy's not. But when researchers actually tried to pin it down, they couldn't. They couldn't. They couldn't. They couldn't. One well-known 2002 study defined as having psychological edge that helps you cope better than your opponents under pressure. Another team a few years later built a completely different model. There is still no single agreed on definition in the research today. And when a word doesn't have a real definition, it becomes whatever people need it to mean. Sports commentators use mental toughness as a catch all explanation anytime someone wins. Nobody says when a tough athlete loses, it's not really describing anything anymore. It's just a label we slap on success after the fact and take away the second things don't go your way. Think about how that plays out in real life. You have one bad race, one bad game, one moment where you freeze up, and suddenly the story becomes, I guess I'm just not mentally tough. As if it is a fixed trait. You either have it or you don't, instead of something that you can actually build. And that's something that should bother you, to be completely honest, because if you don't know what a thing actually is, you can build it on purpose. You just end up hoping you have it and find the hard way when you don't. But here's the biggest myth, and it's the one that does the most damage. We think mental toughness means not feeling anything. Stone face, no nerves, no doubt, push it all down and perform anyways. Research on this is pretty clear that this is backwards. Athletes who suppress their emotions instead of actually managing them perform worse, not better. Emotional suppression isn't a strength, it's just delayed cost. It comes out somewhere, usually at the worst time. Real toughness was never about having no feelings, about what you do with the ones you have. So, if suppression isn't the answer, why does just being tougher still get said in every locker room in this country and probably around the world? Because it's not actually addressing anything. It's a slogan standing for a real answer. The real reason athletes crack under pressure isn't a lack of grit, it's that most of us were never thought we are separate from how we perform. So when the pressure hits and the outcome's on the line, there's no self to fall back on. It's just a scoreboard. And that's disconnection. No weakness. The actual problem is mental toughness has been mislabeling this whole time. So let me tell you about a moment that I mentioned in the beginning of the episode. In 2003, 2004, Kobe Bryant, which is maybe the lowest point of his career and his personal life, at the same time, he reaches out to perform. He reached out to a performance coach to help because, in his words, He felt like he was losing the edge. And the response he got wasn't toughen up. The mental performance coach he was working with told him something completely different. You're not losing your edge, you're losing your identity. Kobe wasn't cracking because he wasn't tough enough. He was cracking because everything that made him was under attack at once. And he had nothing separating who he was as a person from who needed to be on the court. So he built something. He created an entire other identity, the Black Mamba, specifically so he could step into a version of himself that competition couldn't touch. In his words, I had to separate myself. And that's not suppression, that's not just be tough, that's identity construction. He didn't grit his teeth harder, he built a container, a version of himself he could step into on purpose whenever he needed. Off the court, he could still be a person dealing with real, messy human problems. On the court, he had somewhere to put it, all of that so it didn't run the show for him. And here's the part that mattered the most. The Black Mamba wasn't about having no emotion, it was about having a place for it, a boundary, a decision about which version of himself was in control and when. That's a completely different skill than don't feel anything. And it's a skill you can actually practice, unlike just being told to toughen up. That's the piece nobody talks about when they talk about Kobe's mentality. It wasn't raw toughness, it was ownership over who he was, choosing to be on purpose, under pressure. Even the people around him noticed the difference he made. Teammates have talked about how his intensity in big moments changed the standard for everyone on the floor with him. Not because he yelled the loudest, but because he would clearly already decide who he was going to be before the moment arrived. And here it's where it gets interesting because this isn't just a good story. That's real research behind why this works. Studies on athletes burnout have found that autonomy, meaning athletes actually having ownership and decision making power over their own training and choices, is directly linked to better psychological outcomes and lower burnout. So, athletes in an environment that support their autonomy actually develop more of what we call mental toughness. Athletes who don't have that ownership burn out faster, regardless of how tough they are told to be. In other words, ownership isn't just a mindset, it's something that actually protects you from burnout, from cracking under pressure, from becoming the athlete who looks fine until one bad week takes the whole thing down. Think about what that actually means. The guy who yells at you just to be tougher isn't giving you a tool, he's giving you a slogan. Real toughness, the kind that shows up in research, comes from having actual ownership over your training, your choices, your process, not from having someone else's will impose on you until you comply. That's not confidence. That's just basically the whole thesis of this show. So here's the actual reframe, and I want you to hold into this. Mental toughness isn't a personality trait. It's not something you either born with or not. It's not gritting your teeth or suppressing everything you break. It's ownership. It's building an identity on purpose that you can step into under pressure. It's deciding who you are before the moment demands it, instead of finding out in real time and hoping you like the answer. That's the difference between an athlete who's tough by accident and one who's tough on purpose. Toughness isn't something you have, it's something you decide to be. Before you go, here's something to actually do, not just to think about. Tonight, before your next competition, write it down one sentence. When it gets hard, I am, and then I want you to fill out that blank spot. Not what you will do, who you will be. Kobe had that Black Mamba. You don't need a nickname. You just need a decision. Make it before you need it, not during it. If this reframe hit you in the way that I think you will, and that I hope it will, do two things. Follow the show so you don't miss the what's next, and send this episode to one athlete you know who's being told to just be tougher without anyone ever explaining what that actually means. That is for this one. Win their mental battle first. Everything else will follow. See you guys on the next time.